Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Power of Connection broadcast. My name is Bobby Umar. I'm here with Brice Scheschuk. Welcome, Brice. Thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Bobby. Thanks very much for having me. Nice to see you again.
Excellent. Well, today we're going to have a fantastic conversation around entrepreneurship, how businesses, particularly in today's COVID world, are innovating, building better mindsets, and trying to grow and get through this. And, Brice is the perfect person to talk about this because he's the managing partner at Global Live Capital, and they actually work with quite a few companies. And so he's getting some insights into how the different companies are working. And he's also the co-founder of Win Mobile, for those of you who are in Canada and know that quite well. So thanks for joining us today. Now, some logistics, if you're just joining us, again, we're looking for engagement. We want you people to interact with us. So if you look at the actual post itself, it says, ask questions, share below where you're from. Are you from North America, South America, Africa, Asia, Europe, Australia? Let us know. You can also ask any questions about, how entrepreneurs and how businesses are trying to deal with COVID. I mean, we're now in month 3 of this, and I think a lot of companies are still struggling. They're still coming out of the woodwork, trying to figure things out. Some are ahead of the game, some are behind the game, and so I think it's important for us to kind of have that discussion and understand what's going on. This is a chance for you to ask all the questions you like. And if you like what you're seeing, ask the questions. You can also like, handshake, heart, light bulb, smiley face. You can tag people during the conversation. You can also share this on your own pages to bring people part of the conversation. The replay will always be available on my profile, so you can check it out even after it's done to catch some of the nuggets that Brice is going to share with us today. So Brice, before we get into the topic around how businesses are dealing with COVID and innovating and building better mindsets, things like that, why don't you tell people a little bit about your story and kind of how you came to be where you are, and then we'll kind of go into the topic itself.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Bobby, again. So very quickly for your listeners, I'm a Canadian born, raised locally. I tell people in North America in general that I was raised in a city that is north of the state of North Dakota, to give everyone an understanding. It's a province called Saskatchewan. Its winters are minus 30 degrees centigrade, and consequently, it has a very small population. So I grew up in a very typical Canadian household of the 70s and 80s. And when I graduated from high school, I was trying to figure out what to do in the world, and I ended up joining the Naval Reserve. And this was in 1989. And so people are always a little confused at how a landlocked province can have a Naval Reserve unit, but it is a thing. You do your boot camp locally. And I spent my first year at university in my home province. And then through the Navy, I ended up out in the West Coast in a city called Victoria, BC. And that was my first taste of what I'll call true freedom, where I was out of the house and I was also out of the province, and I started to see a little more of the world. And so I ended up never going back to get to that punchline. And I decided through that experience I loved the coast. I loved what I was doing. And I ended up deciding to go to school, flipping across the country to the East Coast in Halifax, Nova Scotia, at a school called Dalhousie University. I did a commerce degree there. And what I say to people when we talk about entrepreneurship is I graduated university in 1994. I did 4 years of biz school. Over the course of that entire time, I do not remember the word entrepreneur being stated in my business school. That was an era where people they went to business school with aspirations of pretty traditional careers thereafter. And that was kind of how it was framed. And so when I graduated, I knew that I wanted to be in the business capital of Canada, which is Toronto. And I knew that I wanted to try something in finance. That's about all I knew. And so I ended up getting a job with what is now PricewaterhouseCoopers. Spent 4 years there, 2 years in audit, and got my fill of that. Got my CA, now called a CPA. And then in the mid-90s, as we know, something super interesting happened with technology and the ability to lower the bar to starting new businesses. And that was Netscape and the consumer internet. And when the Netscape browser came out, it changed all of our lives, as we know, created the consumer internet. And 3 other guys and myself, who were all working professional services, had a business idea, call it Investor Relations 1.0 in the early web. We left our respective firms in 1998, and we started our first business. And from there, we kind of went through all the cycles that one does as an entrepreneur. We had the ups of riding the first .com. We had the crash. We had to lick our wounds and get some jobs to pay the bills again. And then in 2003, I met, I had a very fateful meeting with what is now my current business partner, a very successful Canadian entrepreneur named Tony Lacavera. He had spent 5 years to that point building a telecom business. And I kind of joined him, became a partner, and he and I and a couple of others grew a set of telecom services businesses, ultimately culminating in a challenger wireless brand to fight the Canadian wireless oligopoly that we ran for about 8 years, sold in 2016, and moved to the other side of the table from operating and scaling to investing the proceeds of our liquidity. And so we've kind of seen the ecosystem, the innovation economy, we'll call it, from all ends: operator, consultant, investor, and so on. And I currently am the managing partner of our investment group, and we manage, a 9-figure portfolio that crosses all asset classes.
How many total companies are there?
There's probably about 300 investments, I'll say. But to call each one a company, some are real estate projects, some are PE, some are private debt funds, and then you have directs in venture and venture funds and so on. So it really crosses a wide spectrum of styles.
So take me through this. With the COVID hits, everything. For me, the big thing that kind of hit me with COVID was when the NBA shut down their season. I was like, wow, okay, this is serious, man. I need to consider what I'm doing. So you're going through this, you're thinking, wow, to take me through that first week in terms of what you kind of went through.
Yeah, so for me, it was interesting. I was not really attuned to all of the comings and goings of what was happening in the January, February timeframe. Now, looking back in hindsight, we can see that there were some truly ahead of the curve, and they got worried, and they saw the signs coming out of China, and they got trickles of data, however they monitored it, and then they made moves. For me, it kind of went like this. Okay, and it's interesting. On March 10th, so just the week before lockdown, I was in Ottawa, Canada, the capital of Canada. I was giving a public presentation, hosting a panel, talking about how great the Canadian innovation ecosystem was becoming, how the government had done a good job as a partner, and how they needed to do more, and we needed to expand from software to life sciences and to clean tech, and we had to get the flywheel spinning even faster. Right. March 10th. March 11th, I fly back to Toronto. March 17th, a Tuesday, we shut our office down. March 23rd, a Monday night, I am doing a town hall with a group called TechTO alongside a number of other people like me in the ecosystem to 2,000 people. And my topic was right-sizing your business. So literally from March 10th to March 23rd, I went from rah, great, let's keep running this tech thing that we're doing in Canada and starting to see success with, to, oh my God, we are moving into survival mode and the world is falling apart around us. Right. So that's actually how it started for me. Wow.
And so, so here you are managing your investments. And so, how was the feeling with them? And I mean, were they feeling, because I mean, as an entrepreneur, I can tell you that part of me was just kind of rolling with the punches, right? But then and it took me a while for me to say, oh man, I need to really rethink how I want to do things. I was just I spent the first month just listening, taking it all in. Other people reacted really quickly, like, oh my gosh, and other people did. So I mean, how were the investments? How did you advise them? How were they all feeling that ecosystem there?
Yeah, look, okay, so it's a complicated question to unpack, particularly when you're crossing so many industries. Sure. So here's what I would say to you, if I could try to compress it. The first thing that I did is I did a similar thing to what you said. I listened. Okay, so I would listen to data from real estate. What's happening with rents? Are we going to collect all our rents the next month? What's happening in varying operating private equity businesses? Are they shutting down? How are they adapting to remote work environments? Are they, what are their revenue forecasts starting to look like? How are private credit funds starting to think about the world? And so what I tried to do is I tried to take a whole bunch of data from a whole bunch of different places that was somewhat disparate and try to use those data points to create a feedback loop, basically, as to how, when I was asked to advise, I would be able to put some semblance of order to advice. The second thing that I did is that I went back and look, I went to high school in the 80s, like I said, mid to late 80s. I remember 1987 and the crash a little bit more as a student. And then I went through, and for me, it was .com 1.0. It was September 11th. It was the global financial crisis, and our own businesses that we've operated have had a sequence of crises. We almost went bankrupt a few times, and pivots and all this kind of stuff. So what I did is I took a bunch of these different points, what was happening in the actual world from data I was receiving and some past experience. And I recognized pretty quickly that where my advice would probably be useful and requested was more in our venture portfolio. Direct investments, maybe younger entrepreneurs that hadn't been through the same battle experiences, and so on and so forth. So it caused me to start to focus my thinking on how to give them the best advice. And that turned into, if I could summarize, X amount of my time spent one-on-one with our founders, and X amount of my time actually just helping the ecosystem think through this. Okay. And what that ultimately resulted in, you start looking kind of back on how you did it. It's only been 3 months, but we're already looking back and feeling like we've aged 100 years, is we look at it as it was a 3-phase process. Okay. And phase 1, we call first order survival. And that was the panic. Okay. We got to get everyone home. We got to deal with childcare. We got to look at government support. We got to figure out, what are we shutting down? Are we going to be able to collect revenue? Are we going to, all the basics. Then we moved, after 2 to 3 weeks, and I will say the venture ecosystem responded super quickly. And why did they do that? They are always tighter from a burn perspective and a cash perspective. Their shareholders would be very attuned to having them look at their runway and their survivability. And they were very actively engaged with their customer bases to understand what the knock-on impacts were to them. So we moved super quick to shore up the situation, be it layoffs, sadly, be it cutting runway in whatever way possible, be it, applying for government support and so on. Then about 3 weeks in to this crisis, we started changing our tune, and we created a framework that added 2 other orders. We call it second and third order. And the second order, I'll call it the mid framework, that was take a breath. You've just come through craziness, 24/7 survival. Take a breath and start looking out a little bit further around what's really happening to your customers and how can you get back to engaging with them, figuring out your best points of value, and think about, don't worry about go to market for a minute. Figure out, what does your customer need? How do you play with your product to be effective there? And where are some opportunities starting to arise? Okay. And so that was a second order. And we saw that and we messaged that for a little while, probably another month and a bit. And then very quickly, we saw what I'll call now third order. And third order was broader strategic. So broader product extensions, maybe moving up or down the tech stack, maybe looking at some other customer bases, opportunities. And in extreme scenarios, we've actually started to see M&A come into its being. And what we have found in our own businesses is the best M&A that we've ever been able to achieve has been generally when the target is in crisis. Now we have the world in crisis, so that creates target-rich opportunities and third-order M&A type thinking. And that menu and that framework has now, I think, hit stride, and I can say quite comfortably is how the ecosystem kind of moved its way through the crisis to date.
Wow, that's a great summary. And we're talking with Brice, managing partner of Global Life Capital. He's also co-founder of Win Mobile. Giving some great insights in terms of how he actually helps support the different investments that from his company to navigate the storm of COVID, which was fantastic. And what's interesting to me was actually, as you were talking, I kind of imagined you as kind of like related to kind of the health workers, in the sense that you have all these different clients and customers that you work for and support, and so you're kind of in triage. And if someone was like a travel company that's decimated, or let's say it's a Zoom company and they have this opportunity to take advantage, you kind of have to assess each one in terms of where you want to spend your time. I mean, and was there a way that you did that? How do you manage that? Yeah,
look, that is a great question. So it kind of went like this for me. I'm going to break it into kind of thirds. A third was everything non-venture, understanding what was happening in the non-venture asset classes. All of those have professional management that are typically more experienced than I am in some cases, in many cases, or are domain specific. And it's more me getting data. Tell me what's going on. I'm trying to understand. They're giving updates, to LPs and to investors, and I'm listening. That's a third of my time. Okay. A third of my time was decided to ultimately be spent helping the ecosystem generally. And that's what I mentioned, some of these town halls that we did, some of these broader video presentations, working with accelerator groups and their founders, and the list goes on and on and on. And that was super useful because it also gave me input in terms of how to get a feedback loop. And then third was getting very direct with our portfolio and those founders that needed and wanted guidance. And how I did, look, I looked across our venture portfolio. I generally speaking talk to most founders. Some are further along with big and more established shareholders than we are, and others are not. And within that, you kind of figure out where is the best return on your time for every minute you spend with your portfolio, triaging them through this. And that was kind of how that exercise kicked out for us.
Although, wouldn't some of them be asking for more time, but they can't get it? I mean, that seems like a really hard thing to kind of navigate.
Yeah, look, there seemed to be a natural cadence that happened. So at the start, it was very hectic. People I hadn't heard from in a while were suddenly starting to chat. We're hour here, hour there, and you extend your days to make time for as many people as possible, as efficiently as possible. And I would say that it didn't get to a point where I had to literally say, I'm turning you down from a call. I think some of them probably got kicked out a bit. But yeah, the prioritization process in our world, in that portfolio, would have probably been check size, stage that the company was at, and kind of an assessment of risk to their business as a result of COVID. A different, to give two examples, an enterprise software company selling to banks is going to be in a much different position than a restaurant tech company selling to restaurants that have completely closed down. Right. And so, that nature of how urgent and crazy it's going to be for them would also be a priority. And then the need of a founder for advice versus a founder that might have a bigger network that was already getting advice in a broader cap table or whatever the case may be. Those would be three off the top of my head ways of prioritization.
Got it. Okay. So if anyone's listening, if you have any questions for Brice around, navigating this and some of the stuff that you're going through as a business entrepreneur, please do share your questions. Let us know, and also let us know where you're calling from. We'd love to kind of hear from you. Let's dive into the we talked about innovation and we talked about mindset and things like that. But let's talk about what are some of the biggest challenges that businesses are having as they're navigating this. In your mind, what are some of the key things you need to really focus on? And I mean, you mentioned some already, but let's talk about mindset. I think that's a really powerful one. I think a lot of people are struggling with this. Maybe you can comment on what do you think some companies are like. Why are they struggling? And then what are some of your ideas for advice for helping them navigate the mindset?
Yeah. So, okay, let's talk about why companies are struggling. So look, I think it crosses a bunch of different domains. Okay. And it ranges from the abrupt upheaval that creates a whole new way of work and the need to get organized around that new way of work, and then a whole new way to live. So you had, again, the childcare issue is like the easiest way to explain it. Okay. It's one thing to say we're all going home to work. It's another thing to say we're all going home to work and our kids no longer have anywhere to go other than sitting in the house 24/7. And that completely changes the dynamic. We all know that. Yeah. Okay. What we also found in the earlier part of the crisis is that when you set up a home office that's 10 feet away from your bedroom, you almost are working 24/7. Plus there's a crisis. So you're already working 24/7. So work became so all-consuming alongside the other pressures that what we saw as a reaction, and about 2 weeks into the crisis, the word mental health started coming up on almost every conversation. Okay. Right. And we started to hold some town halls where we'd invite psychologists in to talk through how to think about mental health and wellness and how to take some of the pressure off your staff and so on and so forth. So let's call that part of the pressure and craziness of the early stages of this. Now, we are also watching, what happens longer term. The longer a person's cooped up, the more they're sitting in front of a camera, the less social interaction they're having in a true physical sense of the word. It's changing people. And so we don't know how that's all going to play through, but it's something we're focused on and we talk about it a lot. So let's call that a bit of the human element. Okay, then on the business side, okay, what's happening on the business side? Well, it crosses so many ways. Like we have real estate investments where their primary tenants are retail. And to give you an example, Brookfield Property Partners, one of the largest landlords in the world, in their retail portfolio, publicly they announced they collected 20% of rents basically in April and May. Okay, so we have retail that's much smaller landlords, but would have similar experiences. So you take the stress and pressure of what's happening in your business, and I can extrapolate that to you. We have an investment in a software company that sells business software to the gym and fitness industry. every gym had closed down in North America for like 2 months. Okay.
Right.
So literally, like, think as a founder, you might have lost your entire customer base. And how do you systematically react to that? How do you wake up in the morning, put one foot in front of the other, do the 20-mile march every day, see what that objective is, prioritize and reprioritize, and continue on? And so I think that analog can almost be applied to any business right now that everyone's suffered some level of disruption and setback. We have the occasional breakout company, the Zooms of the world and so on. Those are few and far between. And the reality is you take your disruption and then you have some choices to make. And the choices are, do you embrace it, grab it, move from survivor to warrior and find the opportunity? Or do you dwell, languish, and kind of fall off? And what I have found, I've been passing the message of move from survive to warrior or survive to thrive. And our portfolio, and look, our key, we could talk about investment theses till the cows come home. The number one criteria for investment in our portfolio across all asset categories is talent. And we invested in these people because we knew that when it became existential and profound, that they would step up to it. And if I can tell you generally, that is what we have seen. Grit, resilience, one foot in front of the other, figure out a systematic framework to deal and move forward. And so that's kind of my lens on it.
Now, you mentioned something about grit and resilience. That's great. How do you identify the grit and resilience in people? Like, what are some key factors that you might see in someone that has this grit and resilience you're talking about?
Yeah, so the best way to do it is a track record. Okay. So when we're due diligencing, let's take venture investments. If a person had actually maybe an easy way to say it is, let's say someone was due diligencing us for our next thing, whatever that would be. Okay, they would look at a group that came together many years, have worked together, went through the true and utter hell of scaling and fighting an oligopoly, almost getting killed 5 times, breaking down walls and obstacles and figuring out how not to take no for an answer to get to the end conclusion that became reasonably successful. Okay, how do I find that? So obviously, if we already know them and we've seen that behavior, that is the utopian scenario for an investor. Okay, and it's so utopian that you can almost in many ways almost cut a check sight unseen the next time they go, because you just know that they're probably smart enough to identify a reasonable problem to solve. And then those character and attributes will come through when the chips are down. Okay, but short of that, then look, what we have found in trying to identify net new investment opportunities where we don't really know the entrepreneur is we have leaned very heavily on the accelerator world. Okay. And what's happened in Canada and in much of the world is the early stage startup world has gotten a lot more structured. You've heard names like Techstars, you've heard names like 500 Startups, you've heard name Founder Institute, Creative Destruction Lab, Founder Fuel, Community, like the list goes, it never ends now. And what that has helped people like me. Now there's a pro and a con here. The pro is that I get to go and meet with entrepreneurs in a structured program setting with a bunch of people like me around the table with different skills and attributes, hitting these deals from all sides and watching what happens over a period of time, rather than the old way, which is a one-on-one meeting. You spend an hour, you do some due diligence, you spend a little bit more time, but you never really get fully married in the classic sense because you don't have enough time. So we found that structured process around the accelerator, around that universe, has been useful to allow us to get more information about the team and the founders and so on. And then the other piece is that there's a gut check done where you poke, you prod, you do everything you can in terms of asking questions and in terms of just watching them and seeing what their style is, maybe comparing them to other founder groups. And there are people that you just feel and know we call them beasts, is the term we use. They are beasts. And yeah, they nothing stops them. And that is a core attribute of what we look for. So those would be a few ways we do it.
Okay. And let me segue a little bit to another direction of this, which is, I know that you mentioned before about, government support. You were pushing for government support even before this happened. So now this happens, and the governments have been stepping in and trying to find ways to support small businesses, medium businesses, large enterprises, the whole gamut, right? In order to keep us going, whether it's citizens who are struggling because they lost their job, or whether it's business trying to grow. What are some of the things that you think that the government has done, which is that companies should be aware of to take advantage of, and then maybe what are some areas in which we still need to lobby for more help or support?
Yeah, so very good question. If you don't mind, the first part of this answer that I want to give you is that pre-COVID discussion, just what was happening at the government side, and then I'll move it right into your question.
Sure,
okay?
sure.
Yeah. So again, I go to Ottawa, like I said, just before COVID really locks us down. And the discussion was, if I could summarize, was government as a partner to the innovation ecosystem. And what a lot of people think that the government is just an impediment. Okay, they're always getting in the way, and they are effectively a problem. Okay, in reality, what you realize when you kind of step back, get a little more gray hair, and have gone through a few of these cycles and so on, is that the government and the winds of political, the political winds swing here and there, but in general, a government with a good innovation lens is a major partner to the ecosystem, and that partnership, to give you in Canada, ranges from tax policy. 10 years ago, the government changed the tax rules around selling private company shares to foreigners that completely changed our ecosystem. Most people don't know that. Number two, under Harper, the government created a program where they injected capital into the fund-to-fund world and required them to raise other money beside it. And they created a $1.2 billion injection into the venture ecosystem. Trudeau government followed that up with another program. We have endless BDC, EDC, SDTC, SIF, the acronyms never end, of government capital support programs. We've got research, fundamental research programs. We've got our academic institutions. We have our infrastructure, our mobility, our housing, our immigration policy, our IP, our data. The work, it goes on, and that is all done in partnership with a government. And if they do it right, we all win so effectively. So take that construct, okay? That's how I see the world in general. Then you come to a crisis, okay? And look, it's really interesting to watch this crisis because it's different than the global financial crisis of a decade and a bit ago, but governments did pull from that playbook a little bit, okay? And here's how I see it. So the way the government went is phase one was dealing with the people, okay? And dealing with the people was the CERB, to summarize, is getting some kind of a labor assistance program for those who are not working. They decided to do it the way they did. We can argue and quibble about the good and the bad of that, but they did it that way. Okay. And that gave $2,000 a month to anyone who wasn't working, if they had worked previously. And that's an easy-ish program to administer because everyone is typically a tax filer, particularly if they qualify for this. They have a SIN number and you can run this through your system in a pretty effective way. Then you start getting everything after that gets harder. Okay. So they do a bunch of things that they try to do, loans and forgivable loans and maybe some equity matching and some of this and some of that with these various agencies targeting and wage subsidies and all this kind of stuff. I would say that the reality of all of that support has been fair to middling. Okay. They're complicated programs. I can't completely fault the government by any means, but they missed on a number of counts as it relates to the innovation economy and the nature of the revenue streams and how big these companies are and how they're capitalized and so on. These programs have been way slower to roll out than people would have hoped they would have been. And the list goes on and on and on. So that yes, there was support there. Yes, some of it was okay. The stuff that was the easier parts to implement, the wage subsidy in particular, but a lot of the capital flow has been pretty slow to go and needed a lot of modification and effort. And I think there's going to be some failures, more failures than necessary, partly because of that. Okay. And then you get into two other areas that I'll talk about. One is occupancy cost. So one of the largest P&L items on tech and retail and a bunch of restaurant and so on is rent. And the government has really created something that was overcomplicated. It involved the provinces. It required 75% revenue drops. It was super narrow. And quite frankly, it really helped retail landlords, if I could summarize. It was super small of an impact. Mm-hmm. And then last but not least, and again, there's lots of other support, so I don't want to gloss over it all, but I'll tell you where we think there's a problem ahead. Okay. First of all, weaning off of some of this support is going to be super tricky. And we can talk about like the debt loads that governments are incurring, the fight that's ahead in terms of UBI, in terms of modern monetary theory on monetizing debt, in terms of deficit spending, in terms of different visions for the future of how to stimulate the economy. That's a pretty big discussion. But on a more shorter term tactical level, we're very concerned about a flood of bankruptcies that are going to come ahead as stimulus has to be managed downward. And in Canada, as you know, the bankruptcy codes, there's two, that are CCAA, they call it, which is Chapter 11, and we'll call it liquidation, which is Chapter 7 equivalent in the US. Those are not built for friendliness. They're built for a credit stack to be paid in a certain order, and the best, largest outcome based on what are the assets worth, or does the business make sense as a going concern. We think there's going to potentially have to be a third way in bankruptcy, and it likely will require government support to try to avoid what we think will be a wall of business failures ahead. And we don't know exactly what that program should look like, but we think it's a government as a stakeholder partner type program. So those would be some comments that I would give you. And look, no country's done this perfectly. This is new territory. The depression that FDR put his stimulus in was quite a while ago, and not that we've forgotten the lessons. The environment is so different that you can't reuse them exactly the same way. And look, we're going to learn from here, and we'll see where we go.
No, I appreciate that. There's some good perspective on that, and I know you're really heavily involved in learning about that stuff and talking about it. And again, those who are on the call, again, we're talking to Brice. He has some great insights into businesses and innovation and mindset, and we're covering through what we're going through. If you have questions, please share them below. Let us know where you're from. We'd love to hear from you. One thing I'll say is that, as someone who's a small business owner, one of the things that I found really challenging was that I think that a lot of the support was helpful for, particularly the wage subsidy was helpful for probably medium to larger enterprises. But I think for small businesses, most of us, I know among my peers, we all hire contractors, and there's no way for us to actually pay those contractors. And I really thought, because what I thought every day they came up with something new, improved. I'm still waiting for that contractor subsidy because basically I had to reduce and let go two of my contractors because I couldn't afford them. So I'm not sure that's coming down the pipeline. Any ideas on that one?
So your point is super valid. Look, as we know, there's been probably a multi-decade shift now in the nature of work and in the gig economy and the freelance style.
Right.
And governments candidly are stuck in the T4 and the W2 in the US, the employment style, right. And it's the easy one to understand and administer, and they all funnel through a certain system, and that's what it is. The reality is this is an absolute wake-up call that the nature of our labor force has changed. And when you think through these, that's what you've just given is an example. I'll give you another one. When they put the wage subsidy in place, they required a revenue drop of X%, from right. Jan, Feb to March. And in fact, a SaaS company, which is contracted revenue, doesn't have that that revenue drop. It just doesn't mathematically have that. So no SaaS company in Canada qualified for the wage subsidy. I would have had another test that would have allowed some mechanism to think through that. And that's just a miss on contractors. So, and there's a lot of other misses.
Okay. And the other thing that I think is interesting, and you can comment on this as well, is I think there's this is unprecedented. I've never experienced anything like this in my lifetime. We had the ice storm, we had the blackout. I was in the gymnasium for 36 hours for a hurricane, but that was it. Here we are 3 months in. There's always that pull of we need to jumpstart the economy and get businesses going because we're freaking out. Everyone's freaking out. Then there's the other pull of, listen, we're trying to get this under control and save lives, avoid, making the first wave continue on and lag on forever. And there's still a second wave, and we have to make sure, number of new cases, they'd said, here where we live, once the number of new cases get down below 200 per day, then maybe we're in a better spot. We're still not where we are as, let's say, New Zealand or New Brunswick or BC, where, they're seeing sometimes 0 cases or low cases per day. So, how do you balance that between, with the jumpstarting the economy and what businesses are dying for, and then people who are literally dying for what's going on? And, how do you find that balance?
It's an extraordinarily difficult question, and it is a good question. Okay. And there is no perfect answer here, but here's what I would say. So I think, look, I've been listening to a lot of very smart experts on this stuff talk about this, the balance between economy and health and so on. And where it often goes is it looks at those places that have had a pretty poor record of how they've handled things. The UK is cited, many US examples are cited. I'd say Canada sits pretty well in that articulation, in that hierarchy. We've been more cautious and we've just done things a slightly different way. Germany falls a little bit better, but interestingly, Canada and Germany suffer from the democratic challenge, if I can say it that way. It's harder to be as forceful as certain other countries are, and so draconian in cases. So we've struggled a little bit with that, which puts us kind of in the middle of the pack. Then you look at the quote best performers, and sadly, in a crisis of this nature, best performer is an articulable metric, and it usually ranges from number of new cases or number of deaths and how the demographics fall out on that and so on. So we do have tangible measures. And if you look at countries that maybe hadn't had to deal with something like this in the SARS world or some of the Asian flus and so on, and they were able to react very quickly, maybe didn't even have to fully lock down, and how they did it. You look to a Taiwan, you look to a South Korea, you look to a Singapore, you look to Japan, you look to New Zealand, you look to maybe Australia to a degree. And you say, what are they doing? What are we doing? And is there a way to figure out a better way? Okay. And I think there will be in future, Bobby. And I think there's there's a lot of learnings here that we will take. We will take away. And I hope that we will be able to have a slightly better balance next time between putting some control on things versus kind of being that free society. Because I think health overrides it. We'll see we'll see how the populace reacts to that. But in my view, and it was said very well by a very famous investor, he talks about there actually is a price that is put on life. Insurance does it, and certain other industries and so on do it. So it's a fallacy to say there isn't. So factor that into your thinking. And his other main point was around, we need to be honest with ourselves about adopting some of the practices of the most successful actors in here, i.e. the countries we've just cited, and recognize that there's a bit of a trade maybe between privacy. There might be a bit of a trade in terms of rights for a period of time as a pandemic evolves. But the win on that of speedy outcome to flattening the curve, eliminating the curve, and getting back to work alongside less mortality is a good trade. And I would say I fall in that camp.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. So, we're probably nearing the end of our chat here, but I did want to kind of ask around, what are your thoughts on, where this is going? Like, what are our businesses planning for a year, 18 months of this in terms of the ongoing kind of, obviously we're going to slowly go back to work and things like that, but the world's going to change, right? So I see change in many areas. Certain ones I don't know. Like for example, one of my buddies he's an artistic director of a theater company. I really don't know how the theater company is going to get back, because even when we get back to this, no one's going to want to sit in a room full of 500 people for a while, and it's going to be hard to get the entire cast of Lion King on stage, intimately sweating like crazy in front of people. And it doesn't really work with the virtual thing. Like as a speaker, speaking is stopped, but there will be virtual speaking that I can speak to. But as a theater performer, I don't know what's going to happen. So I'm just curious, how are you advising businesses to navigate the next year or 18 months of this? And where do you think it's going to end up?
So what we have generally advised, like I'm terrible at predicting things, Bobby. I got to be honest with you. If I could predict anything, I'd have a lot more money than I do, but I'm just bad at it. So what we're saying to people is that you've got to watch, you've got to listen, and you've got to create feedback loops that are very wide. Okay. And I will give you what that means to me. Okay. I was on a call last week with a suburban US office landlord that we invest in. What they said about, they do office. Okay. So suburban US secondary market office. They've collected 95% of their rents for May, June, and April, May, June. Okay. They, the ones they haven't are typically retail in their buildings that are struggling, and they figured out a way to defer and give a fair deal there. Okay. So, and then they went through a long discussion about what their tenants are telling them in terms of how they're coming back to work. And actually a lot of them are open now because they're in the US. So how the get back to work is happening, how the cleanliness, the sanitization, the social distancing, how they're doing things, Okay. So that's one data point that I would say is relatively positive. My gym example that I used earlier, 35% of their clients are now reopened. Okay. And more are reopening every week. Could they close because of the second wave and so on? We're going to watch and we're going to listen. And restaurants, we have lots of restaurant tech in our portfolio. I'm listening to all those founders, and there's signs of life and activity. Okay. So if I could give you a summary of listening to all of that, I would say to you that in a broad macro sense, the last 3 weeks have given me some confidence in reopening to a degree across a lot of places that had really been locked down. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so we continue to listen for that, and we continue to encourage all of our founders to figure out the opportunities in that to be faster and more aggressive than their competitors at reaching into what those opportunities are. An easy example, my gym example. The day that things shut down, they struck a partnership with Zoom for real-time classes. They struck a partnership with another player for on-demand classes. So they virtualized the gym in about a week, and they kept 97% of their clients. Okay, so that was a brilliant thing. And now they're actually going to make more revenue when gyms reopen because they have this other service. Okay, I would like that to be happening everywhere in my portfolio. It's obviously not perfect, but it is what it is. Where I'm very concerned, okay, is things that require that concentrated proximity, like airline travel. Okay?
Right.
People have mentally switched off wanting to travel right now, and everyone talks about traveling within driving distance now as a construct, and that is changing the world. Okay, and there are a number of examples like that. The theater example that you use is an important one. There are other of that proximity type stuff that get very concerning to me, and that will drag on the economy. That will create the need for less stimulus than is being used, but more than normal. And how long does that go? And are we creating an impoverished section of society that I'll call it a UBI experiment? And those are the kinds of things that I don't fully understand. And one of my primary concerns is the drag that we have on this, and then the how do you wean things off of it when you're not actually seeing the economic activity pick up? And how does that whole thing play its way through? Right. And does it get solved with a vaccine? Does it get solved with herd immunity? I don't know. But those are all very big concerns. And my real fear is that we're set back multiple years. I am a mentor at Creative Destruction Lab, and they have an economic recovery stream. And one of their worst case scenarios is a prolonged economic contraction through till, if I recall, it was like 2022. And that is significant setback to the world economy and just a lot of people's earnings potential and savings and wealth. And if everyone gets kicked 3 years out, that is a very scary thing to society. So those would be some of my comments.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think that, we have no idea about the long-term game of this. And one of the things I've been saying more recently is that these next 4 weeks are quite critical, because we're ending kind of, for parents, and parents work from home with kids, the end of the school year is happening. We're transitioning to summer, and now summer holidays. Now what do we do with the kids, or what are we doing with the summer holidays? And people get excited, oh, great weather, let's go outside. And I think the next 4 weeks are going to be critical. At some point in mid-July, we will know, okay, have we stepped up, or are we letting this drag on even longer? Because if we do step up, then it'll be good news for example, parents who will say, schools are going to be back in the fall. But my anticipation is that, there's going to be outliers, particularly in urban areas. And the news will be, well, you know what, the university and some universities are already online, but like the schools for first parents, it's going to be online. And in mid-July, they made that decision. That's seriously going to wreak havoc on how we live our next year and a bit. And then you're right, it could go on for much longer. So we have to figure out a way to try to make this work. And it's gonna take time. Some things take a long time. I remember when I was a kid, they introduced compulsory seatbelts, and and I compare seatbelts to wearing masks, and no one will wear a seatbelt. I never wore a seatbelt. I used to lie down across my car when my dad go on long trips. And when I was a kid in the 70s and 80s, and now I just, without even thinking about it, my seatbelt is on before I drive. And it's just become part of a habit. I'm hoping things about masks and social distancing will become part of our habits and part of our norm that we do it. In other countries, they do it quite normally whenever there's a crisis like this. And hopefully we'll be able to have those types of habits without actually, questioning it all the time and causing a big stir about it and just doing what needs to be done. Yep. I mean, I even have my own hesitations. I'd be like, it took me a while to start wearing masks all the time, and I totally get hesitation. So, yeah, it's going to be really interesting. So, lots to keep in touch with.
if I could leave one other thought to the listeners, it would be the one thing about Canada is that we're never going to be the first to do anything. That's just our nature as a country. So you can sit here in Canada and you can watch the country of New Zealand, which has no cases to my knowledge. You can watch the southern US, which is exploding in negative cases or bad metrics on cases, and arguably first wave, right? They really haven't kind of had a first to second. It's first wave. You can look at the UK, and you can pick your spots as to what's working and what's not working, and you can start thinking about the broader, longer term implications by extrapolating these other places onto kind of best practices.
Right. Yeah, no, I totally agree. That's fantastic insight, Brice. And listen, for people who want to reach out to you or follow you or see where you're at, what are some places that they can actually reach out to you?
So the two typical ones would be Twitter, my last name, which Bobby, I think you might have put out there, but it's at SCHESCHUK. I always say to people that the big test to find me is to spell my last name. And the other way to get me is on LinkedIn. For the business users, I'm open to any reach outs, and I'd be happy to talk about any of this subject matter. And we are active investors and mentors in the ecosystem. So I'd love to, connect with any of your listeners. It's my first and last name.
Appreciate that. Thanks so much. And everyone else, if you're joining the call, again, thanks so much. If you have any questions, you can put them in the questions box below. Tag Brice or myself. We can answer those questions. You can also check out the replay. If you like what you're hearing, you can tag people. You can share it on your own page. And, I think Brice is one of the smartest guys I've had the pleasure of interviewing on this broadcast. So thank you, Brice, for joining me today. I'm here every Mondays and Wednesdays at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the Power of Connection broadcast. Join me Wednesday when I'll be interviewing Ginger Johnson, and that's going to be an awesome show as well. Again, Brice, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Bobby, for having me. Keep up the great work. Keep this stuff flowing. It's good for the ecosystem. You're doing a great job, man. It's been great meeting you.
Thank you. All right. Take care, everyone. So long.